Hey, what's up? And welcome to episode 3 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview DFS pros and talk to them about the highs and lows and lifestyle of playing DFS for a living. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the ups and downs? Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, and in this episode, I talk with Alex Baker. You know him as Awesemo, longtime number one ranked DFS player and co founder of Awesemo.com. Alex has more than 75 six-figure tournament wins, and surprisingly, he just took down his first ever DraftKings Millionaire Maker earlier this year. I talked with Alex about the pressure and responsibility of being the top-ranked DFS player, his future in DFS, how he managed to not only start a relationship, but actually get married at the top of his DFS game. And we discussed how much money you need to be comfortable with losing if you play high-stakes contests like Alex does, and it's a lot of money. So we're going to be releasing these episodes, a new guest every week. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel here on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up if you like this series, and let us know what you think about this episode in a comment below. It is available in all podcast apps. Wherever you listen to podcasts, go subscribe and listen there if you prefer that. Let's get into it. All right, let's bring him in. Alex, you know him as Awesemo. Alex, what's up, dude? Thanks for taking the time out of your day to chat with me.
What's up, man? Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Excited that I got this new podcast going, and it sounds like a really cool idea.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, again, we're here to talk about the lifestyle of being a DFS pro, the highs and lows, get a peek behind the curtain. So, let's just jump right into it. And I think there's no better way to start this, Alex, than to talk about your recent Millie win because surprisingly, it was your first $1 million win on DraftKings. And obviously, that was a DFS bucket list item for you. So, I want to know, does it take a win of that magnitude for you to get excited now? Or are there still other wins that get you excited as some of your first wins in DFS?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, I was excited to win $1 million. I've been trying to do that for like 5, 6 years at this point. So to finally do it, I'm just like, it was almost as much relief as excitement. Where it's like, finally, like it took long enough. But yeah, I don't even think it's the dollar amount that really makes it the most exciting because it's just all about like winning the big tournament that day. So when you win, you kind of feel like you outsmarted everyone, and that's the fun of DFS. And then the dollar amount, that's also important, but I don't think it makes as much difference as people think.
Yeah, it really is the all the hard work, and again, you've hit so many milestones in your career that it's just another one on the list, but it is an important one. And again, obviously the money is nice at the end of the day, but again, it's that challenge that you're looking forward to conquering. And again, you've accomplished so much in your DFS career and you used to play poker full time and then you transitioned into DFS. Was there any one specific point in time after that transition that you thought not only could you be profitable and really good at DFS, but you're like, holy shit, I could actually maybe be one of the best at what I do just based on how this is going?
I never really got into DFS, like thinking I could be one of the best. It was more that I just heard that guys were switching from poker to DFS. It was like the new big thing. So I was like, hey, like these guys are making more money than me playing poker, and they're quitting to play DFS. And then, like, also, I was driving out to Canada to play, and being able to do it in Michigan at the time was a big advantage compared to driving to Canada. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And then I kind of saw with DFS because you can enter tournaments like very easily that you can scale up the amount of investment you're making on a given day very easily, which is very different than poker. So I saw the potential. I didn't really know that I'd have as much success as I did.
Weren't you grinding Supernova Elite?
Yeah, I was grinding Supernova Elite. I did mostly Cap, No Limit Hold'em, and Sit and Goes. So it was very like unglamorous. That was the one year I did the best in poker, and it was pretty rewarding. But then the writing was kind of on the wall that like they were discontinuing the program and stuff. So I was thinking maybe this is the best time to get out too.
For sure. And like you said, you can scale up in DFS so much quicker. Like your process is the same no matter how many contests you're entering generally. Well, once you get past a certain point, so you just dumped all those lineups in the different contests. Whereas, you can only multi-table so many lineups in poker. How many tables could you personally get up to back in those days?
I would be in that like 20 range where like I think you were allowed to multi-table 24 on PokerStars, so I'd have that occasionally, but with tournaments you could get up higher, but I never really pushed it like that aggressively.
You're never one of those psychopaths with like 12 screens and like 100 tables. All right, so again, on your website it says number one ranked DFS player in the world. It's in your Twitter bio, and you've been ranked number one on Roto Grinders for so long, and it's such a big part of your identity in the DFS world, whether you want to or whether you embrace it. And not to bring it up, I know it might be a sore spot, but you recently dropped to number two at the time of this recording. Was there and is there still any pressure of keeping that top spot after holding it for so long?
Wow, yeah, I didn't even realize I had that in my bio. I just updated it to number two because I don't want to be inaccurate there.
You got a lot of
Yeah,
spots to
I
change
mean,
on your website then.
I honestly, I was hoping to keep it at least through the end of 2021, but Mark Levin had a really great year. He made a strong push at the end and passed me. So I didn't quite make it to the finish line, but I never aspired to be the number one player like indefinitely, and it's kind of a secondary pursuit. Like my playing DFS to the website that I help with, Awesemo.com. So I think that is my main job, and then playing DFS is kind of my side hustle. So I didn't think I could keep doing both at the pace I was doing.
Okay, that's interesting. I do have some questions later about the future of DFS, and we'll dive more into that. But again, so you have the website, and everyone knows the name. They see you in the lobby. Do you think there's any sort of responsibility in being the top ranked player, and maybe not the face of the industry, but everyone knowing who you are, handling that responsibility of whether it's growing the game or playing the game the right way, or any other responsibilities that you see that come with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's important that there's guys that are successful that well regarded in the industry because I know that it's been an industry that's been a little bit scandalous like since the Ethan Haskell situation where he had access to information other people might not have. Like I didn't think it was that big a deal, but like that just showed like how sensitive this industry is, and you have to operate in like the bounds of ethics, especially because it seems like in gambling, like people take it like very seriously. So I've always felt a responsibility to kind of like uphold that standard of playing ethically and representing the industry well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And speaking of the rankings, let's talk about competition a little bit because I've heard you say on whether it's your shows or your interviews in the past that you enjoy the competitive aspect of DFS, and even just through the first couple minutes of this podcast, it shines through. Let me ask you this because I know a lot of casual players and even hell, even some professional players deal with this. Do you ever get upset when you see one of your rivals take down a big contest, or you've been playing so long that you're able to accept the fact that there's contests every day. Some people's going to win. Just maybe this day it was your rival.
Yeah, the rivalry in DFS is definitely there. And I like seeing everyone on top, but not too much. So if someone goes on a hot streak, it's like, oh, dang it, like this guy again, like, and there's always someone that's on like some ridiculous hot streak. Like the name is always different, but you're always like, oh, like this guy again. So that's always motivating to try to beat the regular guys, but for the most part, I'm rooting for everyone to succeed. I think that there's enough room for a lot of people to be successful in these DFS tournaments. So the crazy thing is, if even if you like make a few percentage points ROI, like, and a lot of people can do that over a year of playing, like that adds up to a good amount. So I think there's a lot of room for a lot of people to be winners in this industry.
Right, exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest things to come to grip with. Like, you're not going to win every day, and you're certainly not going to win the biggest contest every single day. And there are going to be so many winners throughout the year that I think the average person and again, like I said, even pros have to realize that even if it's your most hated enemy, right, they're going to win, even if they post those screenshots on Twitter, no matter how much it makes you angry. Just understand the fact that that is going to happen. Now, another angle of the competition aspect is your site, right? So you started Awesemo a couple of years ago, and when that decision was going down to start your own site, how did you personally balance the pros versus the cons? The pros being obviously you get to help a ton of people play DFS and be better DFS players. You get a new consistent stream of income on the side, or maybe the main income, depending on how things are going, versus the inevitable sharpening of the field by sharing some of your information.
Yeah, I think that I'd been in the industry a few years, and at different events, like people always came up, they're like, I want to like play like you, but I just am not able to do that between like a full-time job, having a family, etc. So I saw the opportunity was there to really help people. At the same time, like playing DFS, you are kind of like capped out at the upside of that. So I saw like starting a company as a pursuit that like I could like help people with this thing they're looking for and also have a lot of potential like personally. So fortunately, like I had met some great guys at different events and we started the company together. So we didn't know exactly what it would grow to, but I think so far it's been an amazing ride, and we're pretty happy with what's happened so far.
Yeah, it's been a huge success, and so congrats on all of that. And again, it is a tough decision to make a site and go live, and it's a different struggle to add that to your current responsibilities of being a DFS player and adding that into your routine. So let's talk about that lifestyle a little bit because I imagine most people have some sort of idea in their head of what it takes to be whether it's just a pro player or the number one overall DFS player, right? I imagine some people think that it's all intelligence and you have these programs and you click a couple buttons and you pop it out and that's all you do every day. I imagine there's some people that think you might spend 120 hours per week on the computer and updating your models and submitting lineups. So, Alex, give us a little inside look. What's a typical workday look like for you now?
Yeah, so every day can be different just because I like do different things on different days, but like for most of the time it's kind of get up, like make sure the projections are up for the sports that we're covering that day because we are creating all this content around that. So it's important that like pretty early in the day we had that available and keeping up with all the updates throughout the day. We've kind of built up a team that helps with that over the past year, but for a while that was kind of my main responsibility. In addition, kind of like driving the growth of the company as far as like what sports analytics tools we have, like kind of tools to help you with the DFS playing. So we have a lot of calls around that. It's pretty much the boring like 9 to 5 stuff that I'm sure a lot of people listening do, except it's more fun because it's DFS.
Right. So when you started the site, was there any added stress to you personally to add this onto all of your DFS playing and your modeling and whatnot?
We started off pretty small, so it wasn't like a huge added stress, but the big difference is if you're just kind of making models for yourself, you don't have to be like updating them throughout the day. You just kind of log on a few hours before lock and you get everything set up. So that was the main difference is just being responsible for it throughout the day. And it's like funny because if something isn't updated, like I'll get all these messages being like, dude, like Draymond Green's out or something. So it's always a good kind of kick in the butt to make sure that everything is on point.
Believe me, you always have someone there to remind you that something's not right in the model or your projections. So we have to thank our members for that. So again, what you do for a living, it's a pretty unhealthy lifestyle, right? Just from being on the computer, sitting a lot. How do you personally balance that lifestyle? Any resources or exercise? Do you meditate? Do you have mindfulness? Acknowledgement of your mental health, physical exercise. Like, what types of things are you doing to supplement your workload routine?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea that like obviously you want to be as healthy as you can. I kind of like push that off to the side a little bit, like because of going so hard at DFS and now like sports betting and fantasy football and all that. But like now this year I'm kind of making a pivot where I'm trying to like live a little bit more of a balanced life. I'm doing that by like scaling back a little bit on how much DFS I'm playing while keeping all my stuff I'm doing for the site the same. So like that's kind of my return to healthy living, I think, because there's so many things that I've wanted to do that I haven't had time to do. Like I've always loved to work out and sports, but I just didn't have much time to do that over the past year in particular. And then hobbies I kind of pushed off to the side. So I'm looking forward to living a little bit more balanced.
Totally, man. That balance is huge. What are you looking forward to the most to getting back into that you haven't done in a couple of years?
So like because of COVID, like I'd been kind of my hobby was ping pong, and in Chicago there's a pretty big scene where you go out to the bars. There's like special ping pong bars in Chicago, and I kind of got to know the guys, and we had a league and hung out there like a couple times a week. So like unfortunately that was table tennis was really impacted by the pandemic because like being in the basement playing table tennis with people is not something that's like very COVID friendly. So they are starting the league back up now, even though there is kind of a COVID surge. But I'm just kind of trying to keep my fingers crossed that we can do it, and everything will run smoothly.
That sounds good. Speaking of table tennis, were you one of the guys that during the quarantine and COVID, you were betting on those rogue Russian table tennis matches?
I want to bet on table tennis. I've never done it before, like, but have you tried it? Because I know there's like a ton of action.
There's like 1,000 matches per day, and each match lasts like 5 minutes. And apparently, I never did it, but apparently it's the greatest action you can get in betting. So be on the lookout for that.
That'd be sick because like I'm sure you can build like crazy parlays too with so many matches.
Oh, dude, I imagine. I imagine. So you talked about getting out with other people in the ping pong leagues. Let's talk more about personal relationships a little bit and how those fit into the DFS lifestyle. So first of all, you recently got married. Congrats on that, and also congrats on breaking the stereotype that we just sit in our basements and don't talk to women ever.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's actually funny because like it is really hard to date as a DFS player, and I kind of got lucky because there was this one year where NBA like didn't have any late swap.
Mm.
So like that's when I met my wife Nina, and like she probably had no idea that like I'd be busy like so much in future years, but like at that one year I had enough time to like go out on dates and stuff, so it worked out perfectly. It is really tricky to date and do DFS too because DFS doesn't like go on your schedule. It's like you got to be ready to make swaps when you're playing or prepared to just not be winning in the games because there's really no alternative.
Right. No, right. And first of all, that first year of dating is all about setting unrealistic expectations. So it sounded like you did that perfectly.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So maybe like you could scale up once you meet the girl.
Right. Right, exactly. So it's impressive from the fact that so you're at the top of your DFS game when you not only started this relationship with your now wife, you maintained that relationship and then even married her, right? So that transmission all throughout while being at the top of your DFS game is hard to do. And when you first met her, when she asked, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" How did you explain to her? What did you say?
So that's where like having the site kind of made things a lot easier because I was just kind of like I'm like an entrepreneur, like I'm doing this sports media business, and then like kind of like tell her more about that, but kind of centering it around sports media, I guess. That was a big motivation for me to like get up and do something other than just playing DFS because there is a pretty negative connotation around like being a professional gambler.
Right. So just and again, we also have this stereotype that we never leave the house, and that may or may not be true. So there may not be many chances to meet new people, but when you do go outside the house and you meet new people, do you explain it the same way to them when they ask, "Oh, Alex, what do you do for a living?" Do you say the same sports media thing before they ask more questions?
Yeah, pretty much because like I think that the amount of depth that most people go into about their job is like very low in social setting. It kind of like gets you stuck into this like sinkhole where like they start asking more and more questions if you like frame it in the wrong way. So
Yeah.
I just try to like say something kind of vague so that people just don't want to know more.
That's one way to do it. And then you get the one person that's invested in fantasy football, and then all the questions start streaming. So that's how you told your now wife when you first met. And then when did she start to see the magnitude of how much you're playing and how much time you're spending doing this?
Yeah, that part is a little fuzzy for me, but I think that she said she never really realized like the full magnitude of it until maybe like a year ago, like after a couple of years of dating. So like she's always said like I just assumed we kind of made about the same amount of money and like based on what I did, I was successful but not like crazy balling or anything. So Um,
And that's why she decided to marry you when she found out.
yeah, exactly. She's like, when's the ring gonna be on the finger here? But yeah, I think that people just know so little about this industry that it's really tough to know like
Right.
how much is someone making.
It really is. And again, even us in the industry, we don't even know how much other people are making just because we only see
Hmm.
the screenshots, we see the rankings, we don't see all the losses, right? So now she's your wife, and again, feel free to disclose however much information you want, but like, so what are those financial conversations like now, right? You have a partner, and does she get deep into the highs and lows of it, or is it just kind of a high level understanding, or what are those conversations like?
Yeah, that's the really tough part. I don't know how people that get into this while they're married do it because it was much easier for me to kind of maintain like some separation of my DFS funds and like our like shared funds and personal funds, kind of starting off being a DFS player. But I don't think like any spouse would be feeling comfortable about the amount of money like being wagered in daily fantasy tournaments on any given day because it's just like so insane. Like so like I think the best way to do it is probably just not get too excited for wins or too depressed for losses. But I guess each relationship's different.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is an issue for everyone. The how you value money changes completely once you get to a certain level, whether it's in poker or investing or DFS or whatever it is. And it's kind of hard to separate the two. And then for someone who's not in it to just get a glance at what those numbers look like on a daily or yearly basis, it can be pretty mind blowing. So that's your wife. What about your friends and family? What's the extent that they know about your job and your DFS career, and what do they think of it?
Yeah, my friends and family, like they like it's kind of a tough spot because of my like public facing persona. It's probably pretty easy to like see stuff
True.
about me on the internet, which is probably different than other people. But for the most part, my friends and family have been like super supportive. I don't think like any of them are like particularly interested in like DFS, so that makes it easy to well, I guess I have like I have some close friends that are DFS players and others that aren't. So it's kind of a different thing with both groups.
I mean, it's kind of nice because you have a different identity, right? And for your DFS friends, you're known as a DFS player, and for your regular friends, maybe they just know you as Alex, the friend. They're not concerned about how much money you made last night or how much money you lost last night, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So some pros get a reputation for not having any emotion, or some pros get blasted for not even watching the games at all. So which sports do you watch on a consistent basis now, and how often, if ever, do you actually watch the games and sweat your tournaments?
It depends on the sport. So for NFL, like I'll usually have Sunday ticket on with Red Zone just to keep up with everything that's going on. I really like watching MMA because you can actually like catch all the action since they're like all one in a row or each one's in a row as far as like when they happen. But then when you get to NBA, MLB, NHL, like there's just so many games every single day that it's basically impossible to keep up with, especially for me because I don't really like think I can scout better than the data. Like I don't have that like really great eye. So I think there's a lot of tools now that didn't exist 6 years ago that make it a lot easier from a data perspective where you can see like the game flows in NBA or the advanced stats and stuff like that. So that makes it a lot easier to get by without watching all the games.
Right. No, exactly. And again, if you're playing all the sports, it's so tough to try to follow them all by watching them. So you mentioned NFL, MMA. Is there any sport in particular that you enjoy the most from a watching from a DFS perspective?
I think that MMA is probably one of the more enjoyable ones. NFL is like tilting enough that I feel like it takes away a little bit. But one of my favorites is League of Legends, the LPL, like the Chinese league, because you like set your lineups, go to sleep, and then you wake up and it's like the slate is ending, so you can like kind of tune in and see the games. That's pretty cool.
It might be the best. Wake up, grab your coffee, get some breakfast, and get the final sweat in. That's one of the best. So, all right, let's transition. Let's talk about the lows and the swings and the process a little bit. And I've heard you admit to being in a downswing before, so we know it's possible. But I imagine many casual players don't even think that that's possible for someone of your stature, right? There's no way he loses ever. right? No, regardless of how impossible that may seem, but that is a thought out there. So again, this is another question. Feel free to deflect it or go in depth as you'd like. So how often do you have downswings for your DFS playing? And again, if you don't mind me asking, what's the worst stretch you've ever endured? And whether that's financial, mental, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I'd say the most common thing that happens based on my historical results is I'll either be losing a little bit over a long period of time or like breaking even, and that could last anywhere from a few months to I think in 2020 it was a little bit of a weird year because of COVID, but I was in the red until like November or something. So part of it is because my strategy hasn't been very risk averse. If you limit your tournaments to all of like lower stakes stuff, then it's a little bit easier to not have crazy swings. But because like the higher stakes stuff, like you have a lot less entries and the variance is a lot higher, that if you want to be a regular in those games, you gotta be willing to go on swings where you're down $1 million or something crazy.
And I think a lot of people might get this backwards, but you personally think that, or the data shows for you that the high stakes, smaller field contests have bigger swings than the 20,000 player GPPs for you.
Definitely, just because like from a dollar amount where like the swings in terms of buy-ins are higher in the very large field tournaments where you could be down 10,000 buy-ins or something, but that's like a more reasonable amount of money than if you're down like 2,000 buy-ins at a high stakes game. So the amount of buy-ins downswings are lower at higher stakes, but from a absolute like monetary standpoint, they're a lot higher.
That actually makes a ton of sense. And again, we talked about your poker playing days and the level you got to there. So that definitely helps. But at what point did you become desensitized to the downswings and the financial losses, if ever? Some people never get used to it.
Yeah, the downswings, I don't think I'm like desensitized to those at all. It like really wears on you for like months to not be winning. So that also can be a great motivation to try to like step up your game. So it kind of is a double-edged sword where it's harder to like to try to improve when you're winning just because you don't really see that potential that you're not achieving. But when you're losing, then it's kind of that motivation to step up your game.
For sure. So, and that's one of the questions I have too is how often do you review your results and how often do you evaluate your processes? And I think there's just an important value in evaluating those processes and results when you're winning as when you're losing, but you have more motivation to do it when you are losing. So, what does that review process look like for you?
Yeah, so I think and, like the kind of stuff I'm doing, like I use Roto Tracker to keep track of my results, and you can kind of see like, okay, like is this like all at high stakes, and I'm like actually like doing pretty good lineups, or is there like something strategically that maybe is going awry here? So you can kind of drill into it, see like how much is variance versus how much is maybe bad playing. So that's the kind of steps I would take. And then as far as like getting better, there's just so many different ways that you can improve that it can be a little overwhelming where you can be like, okay, I want to improve in like my like player predictions or like the game theory and all that stuff. And there's like a bunch of facets to each. So it helps to kind of be able to identify maybe one or two things to improve at any given time.
That's a good point. You have to limit it because, I mean, to be honest, we could all improve at every area all the time, right? It's just you have to pick and choose your time wisely on which areas to improve. And for the casual player out there or the above average player who goes through downswings or is just a losing player, our brain works in crazy ways where if we have all this negative energy and negative results around us, that whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we make really poor decisions in the face of adversity. So do you have any tips or steps in your process when you're in a downswing or things aren't going right that help you to continue to make plus EV moves? An example I would use is if you're in a downswing and let's say your leverage tools at Awesemo tell you that this guy has a 7% chance of being in the optimal lineup. His ownership is 2%. That's a 5% leverage. You're winning, right? You're going to hammer that play. But maybe when you're losing, you're like, well, he still only has a 7% chance. Is there any tips to counteract that?
Yeah, I think that the easiest thing to do is look at what the like most successful people are doing and see how what you're doing compares to that. So on that 7% optimal, like 2% owner guy, like then you look at, okay, what did Yoda Cow do? What did Chipotle Addict do? Like, whoever like the guys you think are the best at whatever game it is. It probably varies a lot by sport. You could, I've done some videos on like how you can kind of download the CSVs and compare like your lineups, projections, ownership, and all that versus the pros. So that would probably be my recommendation is just kind of compare what you're doing to other people to see are the stands you're making like reasonable or should you reevaluate?
Is that something you do too? Or are you so siloed that you're not really looking what other pros or competition are doing?
I look a little bit, yeah. I mean, like it's something I'll do more when I'm losing, I think, where it's like, okay, in NFL, there's like so few opportunities to play main slates that it's a little bit easier to kind of look and be like, okay, I had like 10% Ben Roethlisberger and no one else had him. So like, is there some error in my process where maybe I'm getting way too much Ben?
I don't know if you have to look at other pros to tell you that.
I don't know. I'm still trying to chase last year's wild card game, and he got like 50 fantasy points. It was insane.
You were up there high in that contest, if I remember. It was like a crazy game stack with Cleveland, right?
Yeah, that was the one I've been trying to chase that ever since.
All right, real quick, a couple more questions about the process and downswings. Again, I think a lot of people probably think that you have the most confidence in your process ever, given your ranking and your success. But the self-doubt ever creep in ever at the end of a losing streak, in the middle of a losing streak, and a little paranoia that your edge is disappearing or maybe you're doing something wrong?
So there's definitely self-doubt. I think it depends on sport because like some sports have been more successful than others. So each one is kind of its own animal where you only have time to really focus on like so many things at any time. So it's good to have some sort of reasonable idea of where you stand with each different DFS sport and figure out what's attainable for you and what maybe you're better off focusing on other things.
So the title of this podcast is the emotional bankroll, and the concept being that yeah, you may have the financial bankroll to be a pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to withstand the swings emotionally and whatnot? And I mean, you play at an insane volume level, and I think it's a level that most people can't even fathom. What was the emotional evolution like to get to that point and to handle those swings when you made that jump, or if it was a continual gradual increase in your play? But the financial side is one decision, but what was the emotional side of that decision and that evolution?
The emotional side, I feel like I had a big like advantage because I've always had really like stressful jobs. So like my first job out of college, I was going door to door fundraising for this environmental
There's
nonprofit.
nothing more
And
terrifying than going door to door talking to strangers.
it was a really hard job. Like we had to raise $150 a day, and if you didn't do that for a stretch of a few weeks, on average, you'd get fired. And I actually did get fired like three different times at this job. So and then poker, like obviously you're winning, you're losing, so it's all a challenge, like emotionally to go in with a good mindset. I guess my best advice would be maybe spread out your playing among as many like different sites and slates as you can, just because the more reps you get, like the faster the long term kind of comes in. And if you're like a smaller player, then if you're getting $1,000 down on each smaller slate, that actually adds up really quick. So I think that's big. And then I know there's a lot of guys that get really excited when they win and really depressed when they lose. So I guess maybe my advice would be like get less excited when you win and then like get less depressed when you lose. But the problem is like, okay, so like you're not worried about getting excited when you win. So like that's not usually a priority for people to like kind of just like keep this in check and know that like when you win 100K, it's not actually winning 100K. It's like 100K minus all of these buy-ins that go into it.
Yep. Yep, exactly. But yeah, if you win 100K for the first time, that's a different story. Feel free to get
Yeah.
as excited as you want. So, all right, let's transition. Let's talk about the future a little bit. You mentioned this a little bit earlier. You touched on it about the future of DFS and your future in DFS. And you tweeted back in January 2020, there was a screenshot of, I think it was your Roto Tracker looking at your year by year ROI. And again, this was your 2019 results. I don't know what you did in 2020 and 2021, but in that screenshot, there was an 8% ROI for the 2019 year. And I guess the first thing was RIP your mentions because they were a hellfire that day about ROI and the understanding of ROI. But looking at that and personally looking at your own results as the game continues to evolve, the game continues to get sharper, are you of the opinion that your edge will ever completely disappear, or do you think you'll always have an edge and it's just more about adapting to the new metas that come around every so often?
So I think that there are some reasons why it could be impossible to get an edge. Like if the house fees are above the level of advantage you can gain over people, because you have to not only be better than everyone else, but like so much better that you're winning that 15% to pay off the house, and then like on top of that. So it is definitely possible that some tournaments are unbeatable, but right now in the industry, I don't necessarily think that's the case, except for maybe a few exceptions. And like the problem with ROI is that like okay, your ROI at a $15 tournament could be 25%, and at a $300 tournament, it's 5%. And then like if you play one entry in both, your ROI is 5% because like that $300 tournament is like so much more of your entry fees. So I think like it's making sure that you're not entering any tournaments where you have a negative ROI, or like trying to get all your money in at the highest edge points first and then scaling up from there. So like your ROI is going to be different in every tournament you play.
For sure. And you mentioned the rake there for a second. In the last episode, I talked to Brick75 and we were talking about the rake and the future of the rake and whatnot. Do you think that now that sports betting is becoming more and more legalized and these bigger sites are focusing more on the sportsbook side of things, that we'll ever see the rake kind of this parabola shape where the rake actually starts to get lowered on DFS because they're making so much money on sports betting? Or do you think that we're at a point now where the rake will never be lowered again in DFS?
So I think if we look at the poker industry, like they had some really interesting trends where like on Poker Stars, the rake was very different based on what game you're playing, and then they had like the rake back, which is like those VIP programs. It could be like 60% of the rake you're paying. So like I think they did that to adapt to the changing situation so that the games continued to be winnable. So I wouldn't be surprised to see DFS like lower the rake if the games got tougher. That being said, like I know that sports betting, although some people might get like siphoned away from DFS to sports betting, like it can happen the other way, and maybe these are like newer players that aren't as experienced with DFS. So I don't necessarily see much connection between how difficult the games are and sports betting getting legalized in more states.
Interesting. That's an interesting take, and that makes sense. Let's go back to, we talked about your number one ranking at the top of the show, and we've actually seen the natural progression of some of these number one ranked players over the course of DFS, right? So we had Kandia, then Sahil, and then now you on top for a while, and we've witnessed both Kandia and Sahil exit the DFS industry, both under very different circumstances. But you already mentioned that you're lowering your volume a little bit in this upcoming year. How do you view your personal future in DFS?
So I think that like I've accomplished most of what I want to do, like playing DFS. So like the reason I'm playing now is, I mean, it's fun, and the main thing is it just helps me like achieve at my job at the site, where kind of like staying in touch with the games and what strategies are and what's going on, and being able to use that experience to put out a better product. So that's probably the main reason I'm playing at this moment. But I think I'm still planning to play like most of like the NFL slates, but some stuff that's just like every single day, like NBA, like that. NBA is probably the one I want to scale back on the most. It's not like the profitability, but just the time investment, like being so high compared to other sports.
Oh, dude, I don't know how you do it. It's so tough, and yeah, if there's one sport you have to cut out, I can certainly see why that would be the case. And again, in a relationship, when your wife works a normal hour job and you have to be on the computer from 6 p.m. Central to 9 p.m. Central, it makes things a lot more difficult to be with your wife, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's all about having that time in the evenings a little bit freed up because that's a huge it does a huge emotional toll if you're gonna be using every evening to do DFS.
For sure, for sure. So as you scale back a little bit and you focus on the site, have you ever thought about just beyond DFS betting speculation in general, right? Let's say 5, 10 years down the road, any areas that you're interested in that you'd want to get involved in your future beyond what we currently do?
So I think that I've really like honed in on like my expertise being like in the combination of sports and gaming. So I think in my future it'll probably be more like focusing on that combination. Like there might be some new things like NFTs is kind of a combination of investing in sports and some gaming. So like I see that as a possible like area for me to use my skills as well as my site possibly uh starting to cover that area a bit. But uh I think sports betting I guess is the obvious answer where that's kind of like taking off in the US right now and it's kind of this nascent industry. So I'm trying to get as good at that as I can.
Cool. Try not to get limited, and you'll be okay. So, all right, Alex, I know you're busy. Let's get you out of here. Just a couple final questions, final advice for those out there listening who want to be a DFS pro, play DFS, and want some advice. Again, I say this every episode, but I get this question multiple times a month. I can't even imagine how many times you get this question is, hey, Alex, I want to be a DFS pro like you. What does it take to get there? What steps do I need to do? So, in your opinion, what is the number one most valuable skill to have in being a DFS pro?
So I think that like most people get into DFS because they want to like leverage their sports knowledge to compete. And that's actually like something that can be a setback because you want to start off at as high a level as possible. And like the best way to do that is by leveraging like different websites and tools that are already available and like leveraging other people's expertise. It just gets you like to a starting place that's like much further ahead and then trying to like build on top of that as opposed to trying to like start off from scratch and doing it all yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Use the resources that are available to you. So that's a good step. And then for those people who want to be a DFS pro, what would you say to them? Would you recommend it? Would there any other advice that you give them? Because again, we talked about it before. Sure, the money's great if you're profitable, and but the lifestyle can be hit or miss. So if someone says, Alex, I want to be a DFS pro. What do you tell them?
Well, I think that there's some huge advantages to being a DFS pro where like my favorite thing about DFS is that it's a complete meritocracy. Like there's no like person that you have to convince you're doing a good job to get a raise or something like that. It's like at the end of the day, you're getting whatever you put out there. So I think it's a pretty rewarding space to be in, and the financial upside is huge. The one thing is that it is tough to build from a low starting point as far as bankroll. It's much easier if you have that risk tolerance with income to be able to take some of that money from your job and kind of accelerate your bankroll in DFS. So my advice would be to kind of like build up a bankroll first while continuing whatever career you're on before making a jump.
That's smart. That's very smart. And the meritocracy point that you made is, I mean, it's one of the primary reasons I quit my job and jumped into this full time is your regular 9 to 5 day job, corporate job, however much work you do is not directly correlate with how much money you make. You can put in the bare minimum to get by and you can put in 10 hours, 12 hours a day and you still get that same salary at the end of the year where that's not necessarily the case in DFS. So really good point there. So Alex, I'll give you the floor at the end here. If you have any final thoughts, points we haven't talked about, any plugs you want to make, go ahead.
If I'm assuming a lot of people here are trying to like learn a little bit more about what it's like to be a DFS pro and maybe intrigued, and I think it's something that's like pretty exciting. Like even at this point where Like I know people are looking at 2022 and be like a few years behind already, but there's always some. But like I don't think like it's so difficult now that it's tough to get into. So I think that yeah, it's still a pretty exciting space to be in.
Sounds good. All right, Alex, man, I appreciate your time. It was a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you today. Best of luck with the site, with your DFS play in general over the next year. And again, appreciate everyone for listening.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.